When it comes to the Bible, the roles of its central figures seem obvious. God is the creator, the sustainer, the giver of life. And Satan, he's the deceiver, the destroyer, and the murderer of mankind. Given that Satan is called a murderer from the beginning in John 8:4-4, you'd probably assume that he's the one responsible for claiming more lives. But what if I told you that the text itself paints a very different picture? Because when we look past assumptions and actually count the deaths, the numbers tell a shocking story. Over the years, various skeptics, scholars, and curious readers have attempted something that sounds almost absurd: tallying every single death attributed to God in Scripture. One of the most thorough attempts comes from Steve Wells, author of Drunk with Blood: God's Killings in the Bible. By his count, God's biblical death toll reaches staggering heights. Not in the hundreds, not in the thousands, but in the millions. And Satan, despite his reputation as the embodiment of evil, his number is shockingly low. Most of God's killings occur in the Old Testament, often on a massive, catastrophic scale. Let's take a look at some of the biggest events. First, the flood in Genesis. This is by far the largest. Humanity, judged as beyond saving, is wiped out in a worldwide flood. Only Noah, his family, and the animals on the ark survive. As Genesis 7:23 puts it, every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. Estimates put the death toll at around 20 million people, given the rough population of the world at that time. Next, Sodom and Gomorrah. 2 entire cities consumed by fire and brimstone. Genesis 19:24 says, "Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah." The text doesn't give us specific numbers, but it's safe to assume thousands of lives lost. Then we have the plagues of Egypt. A chain of disasters ends with the death of every Egyptian firstborn. Exodus 12:29 records, "At midnight the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon." But it isn't just natural disasters that are responsible for this extensive death toll. Warfare and conquest also play a huge role. God commands Israel to destroy cities, their populations completely put to the sword. Joshua 6:21 says of Jericho, "They devoted the city to the Lord, and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep and donkeys." And in 2 Kings, we're told that in a single night, God sends an angel to strike down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. 2 Kings 19:35 says, "When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies." There are also some smaller but still quite striking stories. Numbers 16 tells us, "Fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense." In Numbers 21, the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. And in one of the most bizarre accounts, 2 Kings 2:24 says, 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. When you add up the explicit numbers, the total comes to about 2.5 million deaths. Once you include the unnamed victims, Sodom, the plagues, the wars, the figure jumps to around 4.6 million. And if you add the flood, the final tally soars to an almost unthinkable 24.6 million deaths. But what about Satan, father of evil? Surely he's run up some pretty big numbers, right? The truth is, for all his reputation as the embodiment of evil, Satan's direct kills in the Bible are rare and ambiguous. The clearest example comes from the book of Job. With God's permission, Satan causes a house to collapse on Job's children, killing them. Elsewhere, Satan is described as the serpent who deceives Eve, the tempter of Jesus in the wilderness, and the accuser in heaven. But in none of these stories does he directly kill anyone. His role is to deceive, tempt, and corrupt, causing spiritual ruin rather than immediate death. So, what's his total? Roughly 10 deaths. That's it. It's also worth noting that even this tiny number is open to interpretation. In the book of Job, Satan only acts with God's permission, which has led some to argue that the responsibility ultimately lies with God, since the disasters only occur under his approval. 10 to God's 24.6 million. What does this mean? Well, I think that really depends on your religious footing. For believers, the raw figures are beside the point. God's actions are seen as justified, righteous judgments, punishments for sin rather than acts of cruelty. And while Satan may not have killed as many bodies, his real work is far more sinister: the corruption and destruction of souls for eternity. For skeptics, the numbers raise questions about how the supposed source of love and life is responsible for far more deaths than the devil himself. And for historians, the explanation comes down to context. Ancient societies imagined their gods as kings and warriors, rulers who upheld law with brutal punishments and generals who destroyed enemies. The Old Testament reflects that worldview, while the New Testament shifts towards mercy and a loving Father. Even early Christians struggled with this tension. In the 2nd century, Marcion argued the Old Testament God and the New Testament God were two separate beings, one wrathful, one merciful. His idea was rejected as heresy, but it shows how difficult this question has always been. But whatever lens you use, one fact remains. When it comes to the Bible's body count, the surprising truth is that the deadliest figure isn't Satan, it's God himself.